All right, the Scarlet and Gray game is in the books, a 37-14 final. I'm sure that will be etched in the memories of Ohio State fans nationwide for years to come. Of course, the spring game means nothing except to evaluate talent. We got Steve Hellwagen on the line from 247 Sports, Bucknuts, and also senior Big Ten writer for 247. Steve, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. What's going on?
Well, trying to wrap up as much spring football for me as well as you, looking around the country. And of course, this quarterback situation we'll get to in a second. But maybe the highlight, I'll throw away the maybe comment. The highlight of the afternoon was Ryan Shazier being welcomed by the crowd, regardless of what colors you wear, who you root for. We all have to be rooting for Ryan Shazier. So that was nice to see.
Yeah, he obviously suffered a career and really a life-threatening injury back in December playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Cincinnati Bengals. And as a lot of people know, he was in the hospital for many weeks trying to regain regain use of his legs, and through a lot of therapy and great care by his doctors there in Pittsburgh, he was able to finally make that recovery. And I don't know if we're ever going to see him on a football field again, but I know it was a great sign for the fans at Ohio State. And Urban Meyer mentioned that Shazier is one of his favorite players. He played for the Buckeyes for 2 seasons under Meyer, and really kind of helped set the tone, I guess, for the kind of program that Coach Meyer was looking to build at Ohio State. So he's one of his, as he says, he's got a lot of favorites, but he's on that very short list of his. It's funny how the All-American guys kind of always creep to the top of said lists, but at any rate, really a great sign for he and Malcolm Jenkins coming off the Super Bowl victory with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was such an integral part of that, and it's fun to see an Ohio State guy, I think, for the fans here, who has excelled at such a high level in the National Football League. There have not been, a lot of Super Bowl champions that have come through. You're talking about Santonio Holmes. Obviously was one of them, Orlando Pace. So there have been a few, but for a guy to be that involved in winning the Super Bowl, Malcolm Jenkins is somewhat of a rarity.
Yes, Antonio Holmes would be the one guy that comes to mind that actually won a Super Bowl MVP as an Ohio State.
Definitely.
And I believe that he would be the only one to date. But Ryan Shazier, what comes to mind is so many things, because he was such an explosive player and just known for just being an impact player, both in terms of his impact on the field, but also an impact every time he met a ball carrier, that it was just a collision, a guy that just brought a ton of wood every time on the field for Ohio State. Remember the play against Wisconsin, Monte Ball at the goal line, trying to protect that undefeated season in 2012, when he just Monte Ball was going for the all-time rushing touchdown record in college football, and Ryan Shazier stood him up and forced the ball loose, and that game went to overtime, and Ohio State eventually won to preserve the undefeated season at that point. Malcolm Jenkins, of course, what a great player he's been on both levels for the Buckeyes, and now the Saints, now the Eagles. All right, let's look at the spring game, Steve. I guess one thing that was confirmed here is that while Ohio State is looking for the quarterback, all three of them are pretty darn good.
Yeah, no question about it. We knew obviously about Dwayne Haskins from last year. He was the star, or the guy who came in and helped save the game that they played at Michigan, came in and played so well in relief of J.T. Barrett when he was injured in that game. Joe Burrow was the backup the year before, but then he suffered, obviously, the broken hand last year in preseason camp. And, of course, Tate Martell's a redshirt freshman. I had a friend that joked that had the rules been a little bit different and it was actual tackle football, he may have rushed for 150 or 200 yards in that game on Saturday, because he was getting loose around the edge the entire game. So he's got obviously some playmaking ability that is very rare for a player at the quarterback position. And I wonder if he's got some wildcat quarterback sets that are going to be in his future this year. I think Joe Burrow's got an interesting decision. Statistically, he was the best of the three on this past Saturday. I believe he was like 15 of 22 for 239 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Dwayne Haskins was 9 of 19 passing for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tate Martell, his best numbers were rushing. He did not complete a lot of passes. I think he was something like 5 of 14 for the day. So it was kind of a rough day for him throwing the football. And he did have an interception. Sean Wade, a redshirt freshman cornerback, made a sliding interception of one of his passes, but seems like it is a wide open competition. I don't know that we saw enough to say that this is Joe Burrow's job. For the coaches, this was just one day out of 15 in spring football. And honestly, as Coach Meyer has said repeatedly, they have tracked everything these quarterbacks have done all the way back to when they started the winter semester mid-January in terms of off the field, weight room, everything that they could be charted on academics and meeting their responsibilities as much as anything. They've tracked it all, going all the way back to after the bowl win over USC. And so they've got their own scorecard, I think, for the fans and for the media, honestly, because this is about all we really have seen was what they did on Saturday. You have to say Burrow's got the upper hand right now in terms of 2018. Burrow's got an interesting decision, though, because he potentially could be a graduate transfer when he graduates in May from Ohio State with a bachelor's degree in 3 years. He will have graduated because obviously these guys are at Ohio State year-round, and he's taken full advantage of it with summer classes, and they have a truncated May semester as well that they can pile up a few hours. So he has done very well for himself in that regard and is about to graduate. And that opens his options. I mean, he could pursue a graduate transfer elsewhere if he feels like he's not going to be the number one guy to start the season. I think both guys, if you looked at it and didn't care who won or were dispassionate about it, you would say that both guys are good enough to play and win games for Ohio State. And you just wonder what Coach Meyer and also the offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson, the quarterback's coach Ryan Day, what they're all going to think about this. Potentially you could use them both to open the season and maybe commit to say at this point, barring something changing, that you would both play. It's interesting, Mark. They opened the season with Oregon State, which was 1-11 last year. They have a new coach who's coming in from Washington. He was the offensive coordinator there, and he was the quarterback for Oregon State back, probably 15 years ago, 18 years ago, when they were a pretty good team there. They beat Notre Dame in one of the big bowl games. He is coming back to his alma mater to try and get Oregon State up and running. But to me, that's a game Ohio State playing at home should be able to win. Rutgers in week 2, also at home. That's a team Ohio State has outscored something like 200-6 in the 4 Big Ten games that they've played. So you got 2 ramp-up games, even though you're not playing a mid-major or a low major until later on. You do have 2 ramp-up games before you go down to Dallas in week 3 and play TCU at the Cowboys Stadium. And so perhaps they just commit to these guys that you're both going to play a like number of snaps in those first 2 games, all things being equal, if everything checks out in preseason camp. And then whoever the best man is will play the lion's share of the game against TCU. But, that's one way to look at it. You can't make promises to guys about what's going to happen for 6 months from now because there's so much that can happen between now and then. So, I guess you have to take a wait-and-see approach. And if Burrow does decide to stick around, and as he said on Saturday, he's invested so much into his situation at Ohio State, it would be hard to cut and run right now. Mark, one thing I think about is he's got 2 years of eligibility left. As I kind of coined the phrase, why don't you split the difference, stay at Ohio State for 1 more year and tough that out and see if this is going to be your opportunity at Ohio State. And if not, you still have 1 year. You could go somewhere, anywhere in the country and go play a year from now. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. I think I don't know that Burrow, probably in the coach's mind, did enough just on that one day to say it's his job. But certainly you gotta feel that where you thought going into the spring that it was Haskins' job to lose, that it is anybody's job at this point.
Well, if Burrow goes with your approach, Steve, then of course, let's say the competition is as close as it remains and appears to be right now. And of course, Dwayne Haskins appeared to be the leader because of what he did against Michigan in real time against a big opponent on the road. But that's kind of it's been emphasized by the coaches and Urban Meyer in particular that, yeah, we take that into account. But hey, it's an open competition, and we're looking day to day at what these guys are doing in front of us right now. And the plan you set in front of Burrow seems to make sense in that he's that close to winning the job. Even if he doesn't win the job, if Haskins, let's say he wins the job, falters, obviously Burrow, there's going to be a relatively short leash, knowing that, I would think, relatively short leash, because they know what they have behind him, that they know that the competition was that close. And number two, there's always the injury factor, and we've seen that in the past, play in the favor of the backup and the third string quarterback at Ohio State. I also think it's interesting what you bring up in regards to the game plan overall for Urban Meyer, Ryan Day, and the coaching staff in terms of what is expected to be a difficult week 3, but 2 fairly easy games leading into that, but still against big opponents with capable talent, but you should still win those games by 4 touchdowns. So maybe you go with your plan and you see, hey, with the live ammo coming at you, what does it look like the first 2 weeks? And let's go with the best guy after that, all things being equal going into September 1st. Interesting date with Oregon State. You well know that in addition to their hire of Jonathan Smith, the former quarterback, that Mike Riley, who of course has faced the Buckeyes at Nebraska, making his 3rd stint at Oregon State, now not as the head coach, but as kind of a mentor on the staff for Jonathan Smith. So a little bit of a story angle for week 1 against Oregon State with the Beavers in town in Columbus. Kicking from distance, Steve, has been a difficult issue for the Buckeyes in recent years. Urban Meyer's typical format in the spring game is to back up those kickers and back them up and make it more difficult on them and stand over them and see what they can do. And Sean Nurenberger showed that maybe he's more apt to hit from distance than he has been in the past.
Yeah, he did a tremendous job. I think he was 4 of 4, 40 yards, 42 yards, 48 yards, and 52 or 53 yards was his last one, and got a big round of applause, I think, from the fans there at Ohio State. People, for whatever reason, kind of discount him. I mean, he'll be back as a 5th-year senior this year, and has gone all the way back to the 2014 national championship season. He was the kicker as a freshman. He's been there in big moments. I don't know, Ohio State doesn't have a penchant for playing really close games. Either they win by a wide margin or as we saw with Iowa and Oklahoma and Clemson, their last 3 losses, they get blown out by a wide margin. So there haven't been a lot of cases for Nurenberger to come on and win a game. Even when they beat Penn State 39-38, when they scored the last touchdown, they went for 2 to try and make it a 3-point game. So they didn't even have a tough extra point in that game. But I think he is a quality kicker. I think he's got a live leg. It was telling me that the guy who's also there, Blake Hobble, they didn't even have him attempt any field goals. He attempted some extra points. He's been more of the kickoff specialist. So it looks like it's Nurenberger's job. And, I think as a senior, he's going to want to go out and have a great showing. To my recollection, I think he was something like 15 of 20 this past year in 2017. He made about 75 or 80% of his kicks, whatever it was. And I don't believe he's ever missed an extra point either. One that he may have had one blocked, but otherwise I think he's been almost perfect in his time at Ohio State on extra points. So again, those you should be perfect on those at the college level. It's a 20-yard kick. But again, I think for Nurenberger, everything sets up for him to have a big year as a senior.
We got the numbers right in front of us here, Steve. You're pretty much on the mark. 177 for 177, 100% on the extra points, 17 of 21 this past season.
I think 2 of those were blocked. 2 of the field goals he missed were blocked, I believe.
One was against Maryland. I remember that one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not coming up with the other one, but yeah, Maryland blocked a kick, 17 to 21. So that's 81%. That's been his best season. He's 33 of 45 for his career at 73%. So that's not great. It's not awful. It's decent in the college ranks. But 17 to 21, if you can get 81%, and again, we'd have to go through the 21 kicks to determine the distance, but that's been an issue with Ohio State and with Nuremberger in particular, are the distance kicks. And yeah, if you run through, even with the history being 3 seasons deep, not a whole lot of pressure, game-ending type kicks for him at all to deal with, unlike the Tressel years when we seem to have had one of those about every other week.
Yeah, every game hinged on a kick. Yep, no doubt about it.
All right, we got Steve Hellwagon on the line. You can catch his work at bucknuts.com. It's the 247 platform for Ohio State football. He is the senior Big Ten writer at 247 Sports. Steve, as you scan the field, I know it's difficult because of the rules or lack thereof and the lack of physicality of play, but outside of that quarterback position, and we talked kickers, who stood out for you?
Oh, there were a number of guys. We were sitting there in the press box as the game was winding down. I think at running back, you got to be excited about Master Teague, the true freshman who enrolled early. He came in and did a nice job. Antonio Williams, who's been running at number 3 behind J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, he also did well. It was just a cursory appearance for J.K. Dobbins. He may have had a couple carries, and that was it. They gave the ball to Mike Weber one time. He ripped off. He made a great move on the safety in the hole and was pretty much all but gone. He was tracked down at the 5-yard line after a 63-yard run. So Mike Weber looks like he could be a guy that could be playing his best football right now, and he's kind of risen to the occasion with J.K. Dobbins coming off a 1,000-yard season. Wide receiver, I think they have an interesting situation. You have Demario McCall, who's just a really speedy guy. He had 11 catches. I think it was 150 or 160 yards, 2 touchdowns in this spring game for him. And he was redshirted last year, only played a game or 2, and then was an injury redshirt. He lines up at the H receiver position, which is the Percy Harvin, Curtis Samuel type position. Paris Campbell, KJ Hill are already there. So now you're 3 deep if you count him as well at that position. And I just wonder, this would be a question I would have for Urban Meyer. We're supposed to do a post-spring debrief at some point beyond what we talked to him about after the game. And to my way of thinking, my question to him would be, do you consider moving one of those guys to one of the 2 other wide receiver positions, the split end or the flanker, because you're getting so much production out of that one position with those 3 guys, or potentially can. So I think Demario McCall is a guy who's got to play, got to have the ball in his hands. And if other guys who are lined up there at the wide receiver positions aren't going to make plays, you need to get the playmakers on the field. I don't care if you call them an X, a Z, or an H, or whatever you label it. Just give them the doggone ball is kind of my feeling on that. So I think that's good. Ben Victor, he's a guy who has struggled with consistency. He caught 7 touchdown passes last season for the Buckeyes, but I think he only had like 15 or 16 catches for the year, something like that. Or actually it was in the low 20s, I suppose. But at any rate, they got him a couple touchdown catches in this game. I think that was good to see for him. So I think, again, that position is emerging. There's no excuses for that position. They are all veteran players at this point, and it's time for those guys to really produce on the bottom line this year. Offensive line, Thayer Munford at left tackle. It seems like he's a guy, a sophomore, who's really come on and done a great job. Brady Taylor, a fifth-year senior, looks like he's doing really well at the center position. They've got 4 battle-tested, experienced guys at the offensive guard for those 2 positions, and they'll sort that out in the fall. And then you go over on defense. You had some guys there. Jason Went was credited with 11 tackles. A lot of those were just two-hand touch early in the early portion of the scrimmage before they actually did do some tackling later on. Sean Wade, we mentioned him before, true freshman. a cornerback who had an interception. A lot of guys on that side of the ball. Chase Young, a defensive end, had a sack. He's a big, promising speed rusher. They've got a nice combination of guys there: Nick Bosa, Chase Young, Jonathan Cooper, and Jayshon Cornell, probably the top 4 defensive ends in the program right now. So they're going to try and do the best they can. The linebacker group is probably the biggest question mark on the defense. Tuff Borland suffered an Achilles injury, and we are not sure if he's going to be able to make it back. Urban Meyer has kind of said, oh, Tuff's a freak. He didn't say that, but in so many words, Tuff is a phenomenon unto himself, and he'll be back for the season. But most people who have any kind of medical training know that the Achilles is the toughest thing to come back from in terms of a sports injury, and I think that he could miss all or some of the 2018 season. So without him, Baron Browning, very promising sophomore, Justin Hilliard, a guy who's been hurt 3 years at Ohio State. Those 2 guys seem to be splitting time in the middle. Keandre Jones and Malik Harrison are on the outside. So that linebacker core is going to bear heavy inspection, I think, as they get into planning for this 2018 season, because they're starting from scratch at all 3 positions, it seems, and they need heavy production out of those 3 guys.
Yeah, and the linebacking core has been good, but not to the elite level of the defensive line or the defensive backfield over the past 3 to 4 years there at Ohio State. We got Steve Hellwagon on the line from 247 Sports. Catch him in specifically there with Bucknuts. He's a senior Big Ten writer for 247. Before I let you go, Steve, you mentioned the NFL draft before we came on. Of course, Ohio State made their yearly pilgrimage to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine with 11 players. Unfortunately, Billy Price was hurt, tore a muscle in that in the exercises and so forth going on in Indianapolis. Any late news about anything that's changed in recent weeks in terms of interest or guys sliding up or down draft boards?
I think Denzel Ward is a guy who has solidified his spot as a top 10 pick. It's just a matter now of whether it will be at 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in that range for him as far as a cornerback who out of that group of teams needs an impact first-year cornerback. And, he was a 1.5-year starter. He was the 3rd cornerback the year before. Obviously, when they had Marshawn Lattimore and Garyon Conley, he worked in kind of behind them. And then this past year, he was an All-American there playing at the cornerback position, didn't give up hardly any plays at all season long, was just fabulous and tested off the charts. He's a 4.3 240 guy as well. So I look for him to be he should probably attend the draft, I would assume, down in Dallas, and will be on stage, I would presume. I don't think Ohio State has any other surefire first-round picks. Sam Hubbard is a guy that's kind of intriguing to teams, but is he a tweener? Is he a defensive end in a 4-3 scheme? Is he an outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme? Where does he fit into a defense? You would almost have to cut the league in half probably and figure out, and those people know much more about where he would fit than I do, because obviously they study the NFL and typecast these guys to fit their scheme. But I look for Hubbard, if he doesn't go in the first round, probably somewhere in the early second. I think Billy Price is still going to go in the second round despite the injury and the surgery he had on the torn pectoral. I think a lot of people still believe center, and at worst a guard in the National Football League for him. Jamarco Jones at tackle is a guy that someone's going to get a great value with, probably in the second or third round. Tyquan Lewis, defensive end. They got so many guys up and down the board. They had 11 guys at the Combine, and I'm just stealing my roster here. Jerome Baker, an outside linebacker. I think there are some people who look at him as probably a middle-round pick, probably a third-round pick. He left school early a year, as did Hubbard and Ward, to come out. I think Hubbard and Ward are both going to go in the Ward, obviously. Hubbard should go in the first round and a half, if not first 2 rounds. So they've got some guys. You'll hear some Ohio State names, obviously, on draft day. Damon Webb could be a late round pick as a safety. Jalen Holmes, maybe a late round pick as a defensive end. Tyquan Lewis, I touched on. I think he's a guy that's going to surprise people. He really tested pretty well, I think, both at the Combine and at Ohio State's Pro Day. His measurables, as I understand it, were in the top 10 percentile in several of the disciplines. So I think he's a guy that maybe moved up some draft boards just because of those workouts and T-shirts and shorts. But I think, again, it'll be another banner day or weekend for Ohio State to have several guys taken. And, there's a lot of people already looking ahead to next year. Nick Bosa, will he follow in his brother's footsteps as an early first-round pick? And so many other guys that are going to be on the field, I think, for the Buckeyes this coming season.
Yeah, the narrative just keeps rolling and rolling each and every year under Urban Meyer there at Ohio State, just building upon what Jim Tressel did, where there were certainly plenty of NFL players going through the program, but now it's reaching unprecedented heights with new numbers and records being set for the school and for the NFL draft. It seems almost every year. Steve Hellwagon from 247 Sports, Bucknuts. Please join him right there. You can hear the wealth of knowledge and insight and experience with Ohio State football and the Big Ten. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.
All right, Mark. Take care.